Hello and welcome to the monthly update on how people in Russia feel, according to the opinion polls conducted by the Levada Center. Let's begin with the social indicators. The results suggest that most Russians are rather content with the way things are. In one of the editorials, the Levada Center researchers narrowed down the source of unhappiness among Russians to the loss of life due to the war in Ukraine. But when it comes to the economic situation, the sentiment is tentatively positive, although big-ticket items are still off the purchase list, which suggests that economic Armageddon has not come to Russia. However, sanctions have had a negative effect on Russia's economy and have affected people's lifestyles, but not to the degree that, for example, Russians experienced in the 90s. One aspect of Russian life that has been affected by sanctions is domestic travel, and in a country the size of Russia, domestic flights are key to keeping the country connected. According to documents obtained by Ukraine through a cyber attack on Aviation, Russia's federal air transport agency, according to these documents, the civil aviation in Russia is slowly collapsing due to the sanctions. If we take a peek on the other side of the fence, then the picture tilts a little. Civil aviation is under pressure, but Russians are still flying. The sanctions have prevented Russia from importing planes and carrying out maintenance on the existing fleet, partly due to the lack of spare parts, of course. The Russian government has responded by allocating funds to the resurrection of the domestic aviation industry. Work is progressing, but production targets had to be moved further into the future already. Is this unusual? Well, I personally don't think so. For example, the European Union has promised military aid to Ukraine, but surprisingly enough, you cannot turn up at the factory gates, hand over a shopping list with a check and say, load the lorries, I haven't got all day. So, some of the shipments will be delayed. That's just political office talk, meeting the reality of making actual things, that being planes or shells. The Russian government under Putin has been trying to revive Made in Russia even before the sanctions. But Russia is a mineral resources rich country, so it makes more economic sense to take the profits of, for example, the sale of oil and gas and buy the technology rather than modernize an obsolete industrial complex, which takes time and money. But under the sanctions, the need to develop a modern industrial complex has become more of a priority, although the root problems that slow down industrial progress remain, such as logistics issues caused by the difficulty of building and maintaining a transport network across a vast country, and an aging and shrinking population, bureaucratic barriers, and of course, corruption. I mentioned the Ukrainian government-sponsored cyber attack on Aviation. Government-sponsored cyber attacks are not unusual. To be blunt, they all are at it. What is unusual is that governments do not tend to publicize that they are behind such attacks. I personally don't think that the Ukrainian cyber army was after civil aviation. What is more likely is that they have been mounting attacks on a wide range of digital infrastructure and had a lucky break on Aviation. For clarity, there have been multiple Russian-sponsored cyber attacks on Ukrainian digital infrastructure too. From government networks to the electricity grid, most cyber attacks rely on human error, from pre-existing network vulnerabilities, poor encryption, or simply people clicking on a link on an email which hides some nasties. And that is still the case. However, things are changing rapidly with the advances in AI. And yes, the Russians do AI as much as anyone else. Apart from the somewhat far-fetched rumors that generative AI will lead to AIs being able to break encryptions, in which case we are all doomed, for a time of course, until we come up with something to counteract them. But leaving the extra scary scenarios behind, AI systems are getting better at detecting threats or attacks on digital and physical infrastructure. For example, if you remember back in March, drones were raining all over Moscow. but the latest round of drone attacks was neutralized before it could reach Moscow airport. And the military was so sure they could bring the drones down before they reached the target that they did not bother to get the civil aviation to move the planes off the apron to a safer location, according to the Kommersant article. AI development is among the Kremlin top priorities. Mr. Putin personally opened AI Journey 2023. As you guessed it, it is an AI conference. I put the link to their website below. Some top-notch speeches, by the way, worth listening to. Anyway, I digress. Back to the point. Mr. Putin's presence at the conference confirms that the Russian government is keen on AI, and there is money on the table for it, which puts a big question mark on calls to slow down AI, as the reality is that you may choose to slow AI development down in Europe or in the US, for example, but that doesn't mean that politicians or scientists in emerging top players in the field such as India, China, and Russia will do the same. Mr. Putin has been quite the busy boy lately. Russia is heading into an election year, and I expect Mr. Putin's PR machine is going at full speed. After some wobbles in the past few months, the opinion polls for Mr. Putin's approval ratings have gone up a few notches. It seems that Mr. Putin is heading into 2024 from a strong position. That strategy seems to be twofold. PR and a handful of friendly policies to people's wallets on one side, and a bit of a spring cleaning of the more extreme views that have emerged even before Prigozhin's Wagner Group march on Moscow this summer on the other. The Russian government has been taking steps to rein in the most enthusiastic nationalists, or as they are nicknamed, the Turbo Patriots. For example, Igor Girkin, a well-known extreme nationalist and a critic of the Kremlin, was arrested this summer and will remain in prison for the foreseeable future. The Turbo Patriots think that Mr. Putin and the Kremlin are weak and Russia is holding back in Ukraine. But apparently, Mr. Gherkin is going to run as an independent in next year's presidential elections. Perhaps the moves against the Turbo Patriots may signal a more accommodating attitude towards calls to end the war in Ukraine. In the editorial by the Levada Center, the researchers noted that there is an increased desire for peace among Russians, and Russia would continue to support Mr. Putin if he decides to end the war in Ukraine. Having said that, most respondents believe that the war is likely to go on for another 6 months. Some, more pessimistic, suggest at least a year. And that rounds up the monthly update on the opinion polls conducted in Russia by the Levada Center. As usual, all links to the sources I've used and the code in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. My next video will be Chapter 10 of The Gordian Knot, which is a work of fantasy. Once again, thank you so very much for watching. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.